Today I wanted to try making Mualani's character dish, Pass the Luck. The base dish in the Genshin universe is called deep fried bean balls. No, fried shrimp bean balls. Which seems to be based on a dish popular in Brazil called acarajé, and is commonly served with a filling called vatapá. I'm going to be trying to make it as authentically as possible. Let me know how you think I did. I'm starting by adding my dried black-eyed beans to a bowl and soaking overnight. See all those black eyes on the beans? That's part of the skin and all of them need to be removed. I've actually seen some recipes where they tell you to pop every bean out of their skin out by hand, which takes hours, but a few recipes recommended this shortcut, which I'm trying out today. We're going to be giving them a quick blitz in the food processor to shred up the skins and make them easier to peel. Next, I'm filling the bowl up with water so the skins float to the surface. You can already see them starting to separate. Next, I'm pouring the water off with the loose skins, and after repeating a few times, you'll see that I was able to get most of the skins off, leaving behind a mostly clean bowl of beans. Now, in the Genshin universe, they use something called glabrous beans, which I thought was a made-up word, but apparently it actually means bald or smooth, which hopefully our beans now are. Anyways, now we're peeling and dicing one white onion. It doesn't have to be too fine since we're going to be dumping all this into a food processor, but the more evenly you chop it now, the better it'll grind down later. This onion was actually a bit too big, which made my mixture a little watery later, so for the handful of you making this at home, maybe use a smaller onion than I did. Next, I'm bringing out our food processor again and pouring in our beans and onions. We're going to give it a good blitz, making sure to scrape down the sides halfway through so that everything is uniformly processed. You can tell when it's done when it kind of looks like hummus. You might be able to make this work in a blender, but I'd really recommend a food processor because the blender might just turn it into a really gross smoothie. This whole process kind of reminded me of making soy milk or tofu with my family when I was younger. You know, Once it's done processing, transfer it to a separate bowl. Now hit it with a bit of salt for seasoning. That's pretty much it for the acarajé until we fry. Now it's time to contend with our lobster. To be honest with you guys, I was stressing before filming this because it's more humane to quickly dispatch a live lobster with a sharp knife prior to cooking it, so how should I show that on camera? Should I even show it on camera? Luckily, or unluckily, when I was buying the lobster, the guy taking him out of the tank actually dropped him on accident. Or her, I guess I don't really know. Didn't really think to check, but anyways, I thought it was okay because it was still moving when it got backed up, but when I got home I found that it was no longer with us, but I guess at least I didn't have to do the honors. Here I'm just giving him a bath in some boiling water for a few minutes and then pulling him out and letting him cool. Now we're gonna deshell. For the uninitiated, lobsters and crabs have this yellow or green stuff inside that's kinda gross, but honestly tastes really delicious. I found out today that there's a name for it called tamale, not to be confused with tamale. I also found out that you actually should be careful about eating it because during harmful algae blooms, toxins can concentrate in the tamale and cause paralytic shellfish poisoning. Sorry if I ruined it for you. Anyways, I'm removing the tail meat, which you can do surprisingly easily after giving the shell a few gentle squeezes down the middle. We're going to give that a few chops and set that aside for later, and get to removing all the meat from the legs, claws, and knuckles. Try and get as much meat as you can out of this. It doesn't have to be pretty. It's all going back in the food processor later when we make the vatapá. Speaking of, we're going to get started on that by rehydrating some dried shrimp, which is used in many traditional recipes along with fresh shrimp to add flavor. Next, I'm getting out some of these peanuts and cashews and gently roasting them in a pan, making sure to keep them moving until they take on this beautiful golden color. Set those aside to cool. And now let's start mixing. I made my own breadcrumbs instead of using store-bought by lightly toasting some old bread in the oven. Not necessary, but I think it tastes better personally. Add in our nuts and chop those up finely before adding our rehydrated shrimp and a can of coconut milk. I'm giving that a cursory blend before adding in some chopped onions and the claw and knuckle meat from our lobster. Most recipes traditionally call for fresh shrimp here, which is also noted in the Genshin recipe, but using lobster here feels like it makes sense for the dish. I mean, they're basically just big shrimp. Finally, I'm peeling and grating in a knob of ginger before giving it a final mix. Oh my god, it smells really good. Now we're transferring it to a pan to start cooking the vatapá down. We're going to cook it until the water content evaporates and it starts to caramelize and thicken, at which point we're ready to add our star ingredient, Surprisingly, not the lobster, but this bright orange oil called dendê. It's an oil made from the fruit of the red palm and has a really intense flavor. It's an essential ingredient in many Brazilian and African dishes, particularly in Bahia, where acarajé was popularized. And it's what gives vatapá its rich golden color, which you can see in the in-game art. Once the dendê is fully incorporated, I'm transferring it to a bowl so it can cool off. It's time to fry. Take large spoonfuls of your bean paste and drop them into the hot oil. Traditionally, acarajé is fried in dendê oil as well, which gives it flavor and a rich golden color. Once they've taken on that color, I'm pulling them out and setting them on a rack to cool down. While they're cooling, I'm going to prep our vinagrete. Not to be confused with the thin salad dressing that we call vinagrete. In Brazil, vinagrete is a fresh tomato salsa, kind of similar to pico de gallo, and commonly served with meat or fish. Here I'm just dicing up some sweet bell peppers, some fresh tomato, and some red onion. If you look closely at Mualani's dish, you can kind of make out some bits of red, green, and purple in the sauce, so this was my best guess at what it might be. Finish with some white wine vinegar and give it a good mix and set aside. Finally, we're going to finish our lobster tail. In the art, the lobster pieces and the stuffing are also colored that same rich golden color, so I thought it made perfect sense to finish the lobster pieces off by lightly searing them in a bit of that dendê oil as well, kinda tying all the flavors together. With that, we're ready to assemble. I'm starting by splitting one of our acarajés in half and then spooning in some of the filling. Then I'm gently pressing in a few pieces of our lobster tail, and then spooning over some of our vinagrete. We'll set it down gently, trying our best not to spill the fillings. Then just repeat the process 4 more times. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. That looks great, but what about the plate? Yeah, so I downloaded Fusion 360 and I drew kind of a slice of a plate, if that makes sense, which you can then rotate to make a basic dinner plate. Then I just used rotational symmetry to lay out the lines for the rest of the details. Then it was just a matter of cutting out the edges and then pressing in the detailed areas. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I didn't really know how to use Fusion 360 very well before this. Like, I pretty much learned all of this on the fly. So if you ever wanted to try 3D modeling, it's actually not too bad to get into. Take this as a sign to get started. Now it's just a matter of sending it to our 3D printer. Unfortunately, I couldn't print it all in one piece, so I was forced to slice it in half and print the 2 pieces separately. Here I'm just gluing them together and using some painter's tape to hold it in place. Once it's set, I use a little bit of Bondo to fill in the seam, and then also apply it all over to smooth out the layer lines. Here I'm just sanding it down as best as I can, up until the point where I lose all willpower and decide it's good enough. And then I'll give it a coat of spray paint so the acrylic sticks better. Once it's dry, we can start painting. I started with a white base layer and then mixed up a navy for the outer rim. It takes a couple of coats of each to get the color looking nice and solid. After that, it was just a matter of adding the light blue, and then painting in the yellow details. Then, just let it sit overnight to dry. Finally, we can start plating. We're just going to gently lay our completed acarajés on top of this bed of 3 leaves. But what leaves are they? I went through a few options, one of which was a banana leaf, which was way too big. Based on the shape and size, my best guess for this was a bamboo leaf, which makes sense because I learned they're also native to South America. Here I'm just arranging the lobster shells as close as I can get to the original art, in which you'll see that there's also these bright green pointy leaves that are being used as a garnish, which I'm guessing could be oregano considering it is traditionally used in Brazilian cooking. And there we have it. Mualani's Pass the Luck. taste test. You know, it's good. I wasn't sure how I'd feel about it because the oil, the beans, and everything are kind of like ingredients that I haven't tried before. But it actually tastes really good. I know I didn't really do a good job of describing it at the time. Texturally, it was like biting into falafel, but the actual flavor was very rich and tropical. The flavor of the oil was very intense while frying, but in the final product, it actually comes across as very mild. It was honestly really tasty, if not just a bit cold from all the time it took to film. So yeah, that's pretty much it. If you enjoyed the video, it would mean a lot to me if you could like and subscribe, or just let me know in the comments what you liked about the video. If you couldn't tell, this is my first time filming a video like this, so if there's anything that I could do better on or anything that I messed up, I'd love to hear about it so I can learn and grow. Thank you for your time, and thank you so much for watching. See you next time.